Hi, and welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Mark Simon, and today I'm joined by our lead football analyst, Alex Vigderman.
Yo.
And our scouting guru, Nathan Cooper.
Hey, how's it going?
We're going to do two things on today's show. We're going to look at the underdogs this week and try to create scenarios for them reaching the Super Bowl coming out of, their first playoff game. And then we'll look at some statistical leaders using total points from the 2021 regular season. So I want to start with the 49ers if we're going to talk playoffs, because they basically got into the postseason on a double long shot. They were down 17-3 on the road at halftime to the Rams, and then down a touchdown from their own 12-yard line, went 88 yards in less than 90 seconds. They tie, they win in overtime. And I think that what makes the 49ers interesting is that though they're a 6 seed and they have to go to Dallas, I think there's an understanding that they're good. Our total points rankings like them a lot. They rate really well in 3 areas in particular. They're actually the number 1 team in football in those 3 areas. They rate poorly in some other areas. Alex, let's try to create a scenario. How do they get to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, having those big plays at the end of games helps regardless of what happens in the first 3 quarters of the game. I think that they and the Eagles kind of have similar paths in terms of if their running games can help them have some success, and then they end up facing a team like the Packers in the second round that we talked about last week has some issues defending the run. You can kind of see them getting into the NFC Championship game if things bounce their way in that first matchup. Against the Cowboys, we know that the Cowboys have been up and down themselves. They have, to some extent, like an offense that could absolutely lead them to the Super Bowl, but have also faltered quite a bit. And against a team like the 49ers that has, you mentioned them being the top in total points per play in multiple metrics. Run defense and pass rush are 2 of those. So their ability to sort of disrupt what the Cowboys want to do and get them a little bit off schedule could absolutely help them. Again, we talked about last week in terms of the offense being more explosive than people think, even with Jimmy G as the quarterback. We saw that a little bit last week. And I think that that's something that they could not necessarily, do every week consistently, but it's something that's definitely sort of a club in their bag, so to speak.
The other area in which they rank first is kind of funny. They rank first in terms of essentially pass catching, but not necessarily pass throwing at the quarterback position. Coop, what do you see from the 49ers eye test wise?
Yeah, honestly, I like their balance. Alex talked about the run game a little bit and talked about Garoppolo. I like what they're doing. Garoppolo's been solid quarterback for them this year, making good decisions, but he's still taking chances when he needs to, which has been a big part of his game. Obviously the game manager type. But he spread the ball around. You have a guy, Deebo Samuel, another great year, over 1,400 yards. George Kittle over 900. Brandon Ayuk over 800. And then 17 of their 25 touchdowns this year going to those 3 guys. So obviously they have their playmakers. They have their identity in the passing game. But they have some big-time playmakers. And Jimmy G's done a good job. When you look at the run game, Elijah Mitchell, really good year on the ground as a rookie. They get the ball into Deebo's hands, on the ground as well. Obviously, we talked about his ability to catch passes, but whether it's on jet sweeps or even lining up in the backfield, they know how to get him the ball. Kyle Shanahan knows how to get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. We just talked about those 3 guys. Garoppolo's doing a good job managing that offense. And like we said, they play the Cowboys. That's a tough team. If they can get by them, honestly, I think the Niners have as good at any shot as anybody in the NFC to really make it to the Super Bowl.
All right. So wait a second. I want to call you on that because you think that there's a way that they can match up with the Bucs and the Packers?
I think obviously it's tough. I'm not saying that they can. We're talking about situations and scenarios here.
Right. You said as good a shot as anyone. So I want to call you out on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Packers are far and away the best team in the NFC, but I think the way that the 49ers have been playing, they've had a good enough defense and like I said, the balance on offense. I think it works well, and they have the ability to go in and beat teams that maybe they shouldn't beat.
So let's move to the AFC. Raiders win a crazy game in overtime against the Chargers to make the playoffs. They could have just taken the tie and put the Chargers in as well. We'll start again with Coop. Coop, what do you like about the Raiders going into the playoffs? And craft a scenario here. I think it's a little harder than the 49ers, but craft a scenario by which they somehow win 3 games.
Yeah, obviously they're coming in 4-game win streak. They've played the Browns, Broncos, Colts, and Chargers. So some pretty decent teams over that span to basically ride themselves into the playoffs. Some good momentum after that big win on Sunday night. And when it comes down to the Raiders, to me, if they're going to be able to win games, obviously throughout the season, but if they're going to win games in the playoffs, it's going to come down to Derek Carr. This is going to be his first career postseason appearance. And in their wins this year, Carr's put up over 70 more yards per game through the air compared to their losses. So it seems like whenever they're winning games, they're doing more through the air, and Carr's been able to be a little bit better in that aspect whenever they're winning as opposed to when they're losing. So when you're looking at the 7 losses they had, only 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, but then in the 10 wins, 16 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So in their wins, he's definitely more efficient. He's driving the ball down the field more and getting it into the end zone, which is obviously something that you're looking for there. Obviously, big test this weekend going up against Cincinnati. Bengals have already beaten them once already. It wasn't pretty, and that was honestly really before Burrow got going in the second half of the season. Defense is going to need to come to play. I love what Max Crosby's doing on that side. But to me, I think if they're going to get by Cincinnati and get by some of these other teams in the AFC, it's going to come down to Derek Carr.
Is he someone who is a potentially elite playoff quarterback for any reason?
It's hard to say. Obviously, he hasn't even taken a snap in the playoffs yet. So it's a possibility that maybe he gets to that point.
Let me rephrase. Is there anything that you particularly like about his game that would lend itself to the scenarios that he's about to be in?
Yeah, he's an efficient quarterback. He's accurate. And those are the things that you need to be down the stretch in the playoffs. So I think there's a couple of things there that, he did over the last few weeks of the season to get him into the playoffs. And if he continues that, they have a shot. Yeah.
I do think that for them in particular, Mark, you mentioned the ease with which we could sort of craft a scenario for the Raiders. If they have to go into Kansas City, that is a very problematic situation for them, getting crushed in 2 games this year already. So I think that the scenario by which they get through has to be a scenario in which the Bills and the Chiefs win, and so they get to go to Tennessee, and that seems like a much easier matchup for them. And then you can work from there. But having to, in some way, being able to dodge the Chiefs, I think would be a big deal for them.
So the only way that they're going to beat the Chiefs, you would be saying, is essentially in some sort of crazy Cinderella scenario where something went right that we just couldn't necessarily pinpoint, like today.
Yeah, and even this is not an apples to apples scenario, but like even comparing the like 2007 Pats Giants thing of like the Giants played the Patriots close in the first matchup, and so it wasn't entirely unreasonable. Like this is a team that has presented basically no resistance to the Chiefs in multiple matchups already this year, and it's harder to imagine them being able to pull out a win, especially in Kansas City.
So easier to cite a scenario for the 49ers beating a team like the Bucs or beating a team like the Packers?
Yeah, I would say that that's probably the case. Although I guess they won't have to face the Bucs from a matchup perspective, because if the Bucs win, then the 49ers would necessarily be the lowest seed and therefore would go to Green Bay.
Let's move to the 5 seeds. We'll move up a slot. We started with the 6s. We'll go to the 5s, and we'll come back and hit the 7s in a little bit. Fill in the blank. When the Patriots win the AFC Championship game, we're going to say that it was because Alex.
Honestly, we've talked about the Patriots a decent amount over the last few weeks, and I think the biggest thing, it's not necessarily that they're doing anything outstanding. They're just not beating themselves, and this is a year of all years in which other teams are going to beat themselves. A lot of teams have had a lot of ups and downs and crappy performances and that sort of things, and Patriots have been, while they haven't been outstanding offensively, they haven't been outstanding defensively, they've generally been able to keep their variance low when the weather isn't so totally nuts. In a season like this, with the kinds of quarterbacks and offenses that they're facing, being able to reduce the number of plays in the game, keep variance low, and all that sort of thing does play to their strengths in a way that it doesn't with teams like the Titans, the Bills, the Chiefs.
So Mac Jones earlier this season had a game where he threw only 3 passes. That was a game against the Bills. Could we see some sort of novelty up Bill Belichick's sleeve to try and win in the later rounds as things get a little bit more hairy for them?
I think it's probably overstating the like ingenuity involved in that situation. Like that was a game in which it was fairly obvious that passing was going to be problematic. And I think they just decided, like, let's not try and deal with it. It's not as though this isn't the like Dolphins busting out the Wildcat a bunch in one game all of a sudden. This is basically just deciding to go super hyper conservative because of the weather situation. And obviously it is possible in January to run into a situation where weather is a problem, but it's really mostly where the wind is super high. And obviously, if you end up in Buffalo, then sure. If you end up in, there are situations in which that could come up. But I would think that you're not likely to see anything that's specific to, oh, we really see that this matchup is awesome, so we're going to start doing a lot of like gadget plays and end arounds and stuff to try and make people overcommit and that sort of thing.
Educated guess here. No sabermetric analysis. brought to the table. What's Bill Belichick's coaching advantage worth points-wise?
I have to assume, I can't imagine it's more than a couple of points, except in the more extreme circumstances. Like we know that, Belichick has had a lot of success against rookie quarterbacks, for example, in these sort of more unique circumstances where you're more likely to be able to exploit either the quarterback or the opposing coach. You might see it be on the higher end of that, but I can't imagine it's more than 1 or 2 points.
Going to be difficult, certainly against Buffalo to start. In the NFC, the 4-5 game is a complete toss-up. The Cardinals have already won once in Los Angeles. Los Angeles won once in Arizona. But the Cardinals, by the way, have also dropped 4 of 5. Rams lost their game last week. Playoffs are a new season. Cardinals have done 7-0 before. What will be the key to them going 3-0, Coop?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the quarterback again here. I think it starts with Kyler Murray. And up until his injury in week 8, Murray had a 17-7 touchdown to interception ratio. His IQR ranked second in the league. Obviously, one of the top guys in the first half of the season here. The team was also 7-1, and that one game that they lost is the game that he got hurt. But if you look since week 13, when he came back from injury, just 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and his IQR ranks 15th. So they've lost 4 of their last 5. They're limping into the playoffs a little bit. But I think Kyler Murray has to get back on track. It begins and ends with him. Completion percentage, catchable percentage, on-target percentage just all dropped since the injury. He has done a little bit, on the ground, which has definitely helped him a little, kind of offset that. He hasn't had DeAndre Hopkins for some of the time. James Conner's been, out the last week, I guess, and kind of hoping that he's going to be a go. Chase Edmonds in and out. I think if they have all their weapons, he's definitely got a good shot. He just needs to get back on track. But obviously, we're talking about the Rams here going up against, a strong LA team. But the Rams themselves have been a bit of a teeter-totter this year. But if the offense comes out, Kyler Murray plays well, gets back on track, and looks like he did in week 4 when they basically came out and stuck it to the Rams, I think they have a good shot of winning this weekend and being a team that can kind of contend with the Tampa Bays and the Green Bays as well.
Yeah, the matchup with the Rams is obviously an interesting one because of the division matchup. And also, the Rams are just a tough team to evaluate how their defense is going to affect you. The Cardinals offense has the ability to be explosive, but hasn't been quite as much recently. And the Rams offense the Rams defense isn't a shutdown defense. They're not necessarily going to really limit points, but they are going to make big plays. They're obviously going to disrupt you with Aaron Donald and those guys in the middle, and then have, guys on the outside who can make big plays and it shut down teams, but you're not generally seeing these like very low scoring games. Even last week, we obviously saw that against the 49ers, there was plenty of offense to go around. So the defense isn't what's leading the Rams, despite the kind of big name players on that side of the ball. And both offenses really have been inconsistent in the second half of the year in a way that they weren't in the first half of the year.
I'm with you there. Matthew Stafford, obviously very inconsistent, but has that ability to put up points. I could see this being a shootout. It very well could be a shootout. I think maybe one of the defenses that kind of gets, a stop here or there. But then, like you said, too, I think the offenses, they've sputtered, at points as well. So honestly, this game could go, a couple different ways, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Cardinals rank number 2 in our total points per play metric in run defense. They rank number 3 in pass coverage. They rank number 5 in pass receiving, and they rank number 2 in passing. So I would presume you would say the elements are there for this to happen where they could win 3 in a row in the right scenario, right, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a team that we didn't necessarily, they started off awesome, and they were the team that you get one of these every year where a team starts really hot and people are like, do we really buy it? Do we really buy it? Do we really buy it? And eventually they did sort of fade, but that also coincides with some injuries and stuff like that. So it's not entirely clear whether they were a mirage in that same way, or just things have kind of petered out from the skill and health perspective. So this is definitely a quality team that is probably better than the seed that it received because of the competition and the way that sort of wins and losses balance out over the course of the year. So from that perspective, yeah, they're as competitive as any of the teams sort of below the Packers and if you like the Bucs tier. And that I think is going to be as much of an advantage as anything, is that the other teams in the NFC are a bit of a hodgepodge in the middle.
Number 7 seeds. Let's talk them. Alex, you got 30 seconds. Clock starts now. Eagles, what do you got?
Yeah, so the Eagles have one of the best blocking units in the NFL. They're second in total points per play. They were responsible for one of only 5 games this year in which the Bucs allowed an above average rushing performance per total points, and all of the other 4 came in the second half of the year. So that's a big deal for a Bucs team that has not allowed a lot in the running game. Bucs offensively have been missing a couple of skill guys. That's obviously going to be a big deal in terms of offensive production. And then after that, the Eagles would face a team like the Packers. Packers have a bad run defense. Eagles could potentially run on them, cause some pressure. Rodgers' performance under pressure has not been awesome so far.
Let's talk Steelers. Same state, same seed. Coop, what do you got?
Yeah, obviously the talk here has been and will be about Big Ben. But if the Steelers are going to beat the Chiefs and continue throughout the playoffs, it's going to be because of their defense. The Steelers have basically averaged 20 points per game this season, only scored more than 30 one time. So honestly, it's unlikely that they're going to be getting into a shootout, let alone win one. So the defense has to force turnovers, limit mistakes, limit points, and really keep Big Ben and the offense in it. So the defense obviously starts with TJ Watt. Minkah Fitzpatrick is really good this year as well. So I think if the defense comes out, plays well, and keeps the offense in it, they have a shot.
So we gave Coop about 10 extra seconds there. Alex, you got 10 more seconds on the Eagles. Go ahead.
Honestly, there's not much else to say. I will finish out the point that Rodgers has not been very well under pressure this year, bottom 5 in positive percentage passing under pressure. So they will be able to get to him a little bit. Maybe that helps. And then the rest of the NFC is as I said,
All right, put a percentage on it. The chance that we see the Eagles in the Super Bowl. They don't have to win it. Just have to get there.
I still think it's like under 5%.
Coop, Steelers.
I'm probably thinking 5% as well.
That's why they were relegated to 30 seconds. Before we get to the second part of our show, and we're going to talk statistical leaderboards for the 2021 season, we do a commercial always mid-show. Today I want to talk about what we've got coming soon. We've got NFL draft material, information. Some good stuff coming. We've done the football rookie handbook the last couple of years. This year it's going to be a website. It's going to be pretty cool. We just started to develop it. Coop, what are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, we're working on it. Have a lot of stuff that we're trying to cram in real quick. Obviously, the draft is just a few months away. But yeah, the handbook's turning into a website. Things are going well. It's going to be a fun process to get everything together and hopefully be a little bit more accessible to everybody.
Incredibly detailed, incredibly comprehensive, and incredibly easy to go through. Those are, I think, the things that we're going for with that. Let's segue to statistical leaderboards and give some players some props for their accomplishments this year. And we'll start with total points, which is the stat that we champion here as our best player evaluation stat. And the total points champion for 2021 is Justin Herbert. And it's important to note that he led on both a cumulative basis and a per play basis, beating out Tom Brady. Alex, why does he come out ahead of guys like Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, we're really making a thing out of having a surprise guy at the top of the total points leaderboard with Rodgers a couple of years ago, and then that was before the MVP season. So maybe Herbert wins MVP next year. Who knows? So volume is definitely a big part of it in sort of disqualifying Rodgers. For example, he had 150 fewer dropbacks than the other guys. And Mark, you know from the Cy Young Award in baseball that you have to be sort of all-time great on a rate basis to overcome big gaps in volume compared to your other competitors. So I think that probably disqualifies Rodgers a little bit. Rodgers and Mahomes, for example, had the same total points above average, but Mahomes did so and was out there a lot more, which is, it's a relevant detail. In terms of turnovers, Rodgers, Herbert, and Brady were 1, 2, and 3 in turnover-worthy play percentage. That's interceptions, fumbles, dropped interceptions. Mahomes wasn't that far behind, but he had 5 more than the other guys. And in terms of EPA, that's multiple points per play. So that just drops him down a little bit compared to those other guys, a little bit more of that, that lull in the middle of the season where the team was producing a lot more turnovers. That kind of hurts him a bit. Lastly, big deal in terms of Brady versus Herbert is blocking. The Bucs blew 40 fewer blocks in the passing game than the Chiefs or the Chargers this year. So Brady was given substantially better protection. On average, a play with a blown block is about a quarter to a third of a point of EPA worse than a clean play. So that's like 10 to 15 points better blocking for Brady than for Herbert. And so that accounts for a little bit of the difference between the two there.
You basically created disqualifying factors that got Herbert to the top.
This is a year in which that's a relevant thing. We talked, the season was long and there was a lot of who's the MVP, and then by the end of the year we're kind of left with guys that we're not that excited about.
I like this. This is a theme. So we've talked a lot of Herbert this year, Coop. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, talked about him a lot. Obviously, he had a great rookie year last year, but I think he definitely took the next step this year. Whenever you're talking about your rookie quarterbacks and I guess young quarterbacks in general, you're always talking about progression. You want to see them develop. You want to see them, do better essentially from year 1 to year 2, year 2 to year 3. From year 1 to year 2, he definitely took a step forward. It's something that, all that talk around guys like Drew Lock or those types of guys, like not taking the next step in their development. Herbert, obviously one of the top picks a couple years ago, has come out, played extremely well the last couple years. The accuracy, you look at that, the arm strength, decision making, and the ability to work through his progressions, it's all there. And, like Alex said, I think he's definitely worked himself into the top tier, quarterback discussion, but also a guy who is really a possibility to win the MVP, whether it's next year or, in the coming couple of years.
Has he exceeded the expectations that you put on him in the Football Rookie Handbook scouting report?
Yeah, we had him definitely had him lower than what he's playing at. So he's definitely exceeded those expectations. And, I think we were lower on him just because, Matt will tell you, I think Oregon's offense wasn't specific to, what his abilities were. So coming into the league, he was able to, exploit his strengths a little bit more and basically show what he can do. He's definitely filled out his frame. You see him playing at Oregon, he's a skinny rail out there, and now he's definitely, filled out. So yeah, everything's there, and he's definitely, exceeded some expectations, especially that we thought coming out a couple years ago.
So Alex, is an MVP vote for Justin Herbert this year a smart vote?
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly arguable vote is what I would say. The most valuable player, and this is why guys like Cooper Kupp get discussion, because he's so far ahead of everybody else at the position, and it's hard to distinguish between the handful of quarterbacks that you would choose. And so if it's harder for you to pick between them, then how can you say this is the most valuable player? So you go with the guy who's more far and away ahead of his position. Matt last week said that he would pick Aaron Donald for MVP for a similar reason. So yeah, I think that Herbert is a defensible position, but I think that you have to swat away a lot of people who will not be happy about it because there's more competition at his position.
Got it. I would pick Justin Tucker, by the way. Any other quarterback leaderboards we want to shout out? I've got one. So deep ball, we look at quarterbacks throwing passes 20 yards or further downfield. Joe Burrow was the champ there by total points and by a number of things that we track. To keep it really simple for him, he had 11 touchdown passes this season where he threw the ball at least 20 yards downfield. That was the most in the league. That was part of his rise over the last several weeks of the season. Let's look at some other total points leaders. At running back, Jonathan Taylor was number 1. That's not particularly surprising. Michael Carter of the Jets, A.J. Dillon, James Conner behind him. Funny, Derrick Henry played a half season. He finished 6th. Top 2 receivers were Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel. Samuel was better than Kupp on a per-play basis, perhaps because of the way he was used. Devante Adams was 3rd. Not particularly surprising there. Coop, did you have a thought on this?
Yeah, obviously Cooper Kupp came out and just absolutely balled out this year. And he's a guy that, coming into the league, watching him, came out of a small school, Eastern Washington, and just the way that he runs routes, the way that he gains the separation. He's not one of those burners. He's not one of those speedster guys, but he just knows how to play the position. He knows how to get open. And you're talking about guys like Deebo Samuel as well. We talked about him earlier. A guy who, they just get the ball in his hands. He can run after the catch. He's basically a running back playing receiver. And then Devante Adams, probably the best route runner there is. His ability to run routes, create separation, and just get himself open is why that he's up there, every year in that discussion of who's the top receiver in the league.
Deebo Samuel would be an interesting MVP vote, would he not, Alex?
Yeah, I think that an argument. Well, I don't necessarily most valuable. It's hard to make any argument for anyone who's not a quarterback, but I do think if you want to make an argument for a guy like that, part of it is the versatility and the ability to pick up for a team that was having a lot of injury issues and needed to get a little bit creative in order to get production out of that position. In terms of the total points, like he got 18 total points from rushing alone, which was like 3 times more than any other receiver. So in that sense, his flexibility and his ability to do different things and make plays after the catch, I suppose, creates the subjective experience of being more valuable. It's harder to quantify what that means and whether we could actually compare him to other players.
I love the idea of an MVP ballot that would have Herbert 1, Samuel 2. That in NFL circles would be pretty interesting, I think.
A lot of conversation, a lot of yelling, a lot of comments on Twitter.
All right, so that was cool. At tight end, Travis Kelce and George Kittle finished with the same number of total points. I thought that was kind of neat. But neither was the leader. Mark Andrews of the Ravens beat them out by a healthy margin. Gronk finished 8th, Noah Fant 7, Kyle Pitts 9.
And Andrews really was a beast this year. As much as, Kupp was, so extremely ahead of everybody else at the position, and Andrews, to a much lighter extent, was very much like head and shoulders above the rest of the position. He doesn't have the explosion of some of those other guys, the Kelceys and Kittles and even Kyle Pittses of the world, but he's reliable and consistent while getting that high volume. He had the most targets and receptions among tight ends. He had an 80% catch rate on catchable balls, which was among the best of the position. He was over 70% of his receptions went for first downs, second to only Dallas Goedert. So just really productive, really consistent, and did the things that are important for a measurement like this.
So I really like this as it relates to this show, because this show is where we're trying to essentially open your mind to new perspectives, both from a statistical and a scouting perspective. Justin Herbert, we brought up. Deebo Samuel, we brought up. You could have an MVP ballot, again, of Herbert, Samuel, Andrews. You would get laughed at in a lot of circles, but in our world, we have an understanding as to why certain things would go the way that they would. I just think that that's kind of neat.
Yeah, I think that if you had a most outstanding player award and you had a ballot for that, then those guys get into the conversation because of how outstanding they were relative to their peers. I think that the question of value, it's just with the distortion of value in the NFL being so heavily towards quarterbacks, it's really hard to make an argument for anybody else unless they have otherworldly value, in like basically impossible value.
You refer to him as a beast. So if you go from that perspective,
otherworldly, sure, fantastic.
Beast.
He is a fantastic beast, and we found him.
On the offensive line at center, Ryan Jensen of the Bucs made the Pro Bowl for the first time in his 8-year career. He deserved it. He led all centers in total points. Another guy that we wanted to cite too, Alex, who do you want to cite?
Yeah, Creed Humphrey of the Chiefs ended up in the top 5 after being a point of concern heading into the year with a rookie at center and all the turnover the rest of the Chiefs offensive line. So big ups to him for having not just a solid year, but a really great year.
Yeah, I love the fact that you bring up Creed Humphrey. Obviously, I talked about him a couple weeks ago. Love what he's done in the league. I was high on him coming out of Oklahoma. Didn't really expect him to maybe play this well this early. That offensive line, like you said, a little bit of a concern, but those rookies have played really well and definitely enjoy seeing Creed Humphrey up there and playing well there. And quick thought on Jensen here. Everyone that paid attention to my hypothetical expansion draft, Jensen was my pick at center. Love to see him playing well. And honestly, he's a guy that, he's probably up in that discussion as one of the top centers over the last, 4, 5, 6 years. And I honestly think that he's underappreciated. He's one of those guys that has played really well, consistent. And it's nice to see him, at the top there, and hopefully he gets his due because he's definitely deserving of it.
We are very much here for the underappreciated. At guard, this is why the Chiefs signed Joe Thuney in the offseason. He and Kevin Zeitler of the Ravens were top 2 at the position. At tackle, Tristan Wirfs of the Bucs, and then basically even for the other spot, the name that I think a lot of people know, Andrew Whitworth of the Rams, and Charles Leno of Washington. Alex, your thoughts on the tackle position and Tristan Wirfs?
Yeah, Wirfs was particularly valuable in the run game. He had 130 runs come his way, which was 5th among right tackles. And obviously availability for offensive linemen is a huge deal, but also being trusted as an anchor in the running game is also pretty relevant. So on those 130 run plays, he was also among the best in terms of EPA per play and yards before contact per play on those carries. So obviously he's not carrying the ball, but he's making lanes for guys who are being pretty productive for a Bucs running game that was at times a lot more productive than I think we expected coming into the year.
Going back to center, just to acknowledge, next week we're going to do something cool in print, and on social media we're going to announce the All-NFL SIS rookie team. The All-SIS rookie team coming next week. Creed Humphrey, highly likely of being on that. Defensive side of the ball, a shocker at defensive tackle. Not really. Aaron Donald of the Rams in a runaway. But worth noting, Christian Wilkins of the Dolphins was second and matched Donald on a per-play basis. He played on 2/3 of Miami's defensive snaps. Didn't make the Pro Bowl, though. Nick Bosa at defensive end, also not a surprise. Sam Hubbard of the Bengals was second ahead of Robert Quinn, Myles Garrett, and Jadeveon Clowney. At linebacker, I'm guessing some people will be bothered by TJ Watt not being in the top 3. He's 4th. Second on a per-play basis, though, so you can take solace in that. Micah Parsons of the Cowboys, who we've talked about plenty on this show, number 1, and then Devondre Campbell and Darius Leonard. Alex, your thoughts on Campbell?
Yeah, he really made an impact this year. in multiple ways. And that's probably a big difference between him and the TJ Watts of the world, is that Total Points is going to give you credit for producing in different ways. Even Micah Parsons, having the year that he had, was able to do a little bit of coverage as well. And that's part of the reason why he was where he was. Campbell made an impact with his tackling. Only 3% of his tackle attempts were broken or missed. Was among the leaders in tackles overall. In coverage, he was in coverage quite a bit, but even among the most targeted linebackers, was in the top 5 in yards per coverage snap allowed. So not a ton of splash plays necessarily, but was productive in the running game as well as in pass coverage.
Yeah, on Parsons, when you look at Parsons, you mentioned it, the versatility there, and Mark, you mentioned as well the all rookie teams. It's pretty. You're probably going to see Micah Parsons on there as well. But you look at Parsons and his ability to cover, to rush the passer, to stop the run as well. Basically playing the linebacker position, switching down to the edge when they had injuries. A very versatile player for that Cowboys defense, and it's easy to see why the total points numbers favor him so much, and it's easy to see whenever you watch the film as well.
Sneak preview: Parsons, Defensive Rookie of the Year; Creed Humphrey, Offensive Rookie of the Year.
I can't say that, but I don't hate it.
As we said, we're here for the underappreciated. Centers for Rookies of the Year. Cornerback, Jalen Ramsey of the Rams is number 1. Not surprising. Another perennial star at the top. A pair of second-year guys next, and 2 names that surprised me. AJ Terrell, the Falcons, and Bryce Hall of the Jets. What's going on there?
I can't say too much about Hall, but in terms of AJ Terrell, definitely a big year for him. I actually had somebody tweet at me a few weeks ago asking, where is he in the discussion of the best cornerbacks in the league? In terms of yards per coverage snap, he led the position with actually 2 non-Tre'Davious White Bills corners right behind him. So that was kind of interesting. He allowed the lowest completion percentage among players with at least 40 targets. So absolutely, justified in terms of his ability to shut down the opposing offense. I will mention, you've been mentioning as we've gone along of the players who have been not necessarily big in terms of volume, but big in terms of efficiency. If we drop that completion percentage qualifier a bit, we find a Kellow Witherspoon of the Steelers at the top in terms of allowing the fewest completions. He was by far the best total points per snap at his position, but he also played only half of a season, and he basically got 20 of his 30 total points or something like that in one game against the Vikings. So it was like a crazy performance in one game that kind of drove his whole season.
He was our Defensive Player of the Month for the month of December, largely off of that. And then the safeties, dead even at the top. Kevin Byard of the Titans, Jalen Thompson of the Cardinals, second-year guy Antoine Winfield Jr. ranks 4. And we'll round it out with kicker and punter, as it should be. Justin Tucker of the Ravens, number 1 at kicker, and AJ Cole of the Raiders, number 1 at punter. Do we have any closing thoughts on our SIS leaderboard for 2021?
I think this is definitely a year in which you had a few positions where guys were really outstanding, and we want to absolutely give credit to those guys. And then a lot of discussion in the quarterback ranks and that sort of thing. And that's where a metric like this does have an opportunity to change the conversation, because it's evaluating things that people don't necessarily think about as much. And it really provides us, especially at the quarterback position, a lot of opportunity to test our own understandings of what's important, what's valuable, what are the key things in evaluating voting for awards or just, evaluating players.
Gives you a different way to think about it, right, Coop?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of, when you look through this list, there's a little bit of parity. We're not talking about the same teams over and over. We just talked about the Falcons, the Jets, some of these other teams. And I think over the last couple of years, obviously, there's been a lot of talent coming into the draft, and it's really been dispersed really well throughout the league. And I think you can see that whenever you're looking at our rankings. And it's definitely nice to see some of these other guys and these young guys as well. We talked about Creed Humphrey, Micah Parsons, these guys rookies, really at the top of, not only rookies, but the entire league already. So definitely fun to see.
Underappreciated, the theme of the show. First segment, we talked about the 5, 6, and 7 seed. Second segment, we talk about some guys that you maybe won't hear in the MVP conversation, but have had fantastic seasons nonetheless. This wraps up this week's show. Enjoy the weekend of playoff football, and don't forget a game on Monday, too. For Nathan Cooper, Alex Vigderman, and our producer, Justin Stein, I'm Mark Simon. Thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.